topic of this conversation is the education system in the United States. I did not go to college until later on in life. So I was able to look at it, at the education system in the collegiate venue with adult eyes. And that's not right. Excuse me. Hello, I'm James Keith Walton. This topic, the focus of this conversation is the education system. I was talking to a provost at a university, and when I was talking to them, I said, you know, it's just too bad that we waste so much talent here in the United States. We have, I was telling them about a story about an electrician friend of mine, and my electrician friend could have taught at a university. He was a master electrician, owned his own company, and he could have been an electrical engineer had he had the opportunity and the passion to do so. I think he might have had the passion, but he really didn't have the opportunity. He was married, had kids, and you know, he started off in the trades, and was very successful at what he did. The fact is, you know, he could have gone farther. I had another friend I knew who worked on flooring, and my friend Mark could tell you just an incredible amount of information about chemistry and chemical reactions, and it was his hobby. And I found it interesting that, you know, here this guy could have been a chemist, but opportunity didn't work out that way, and he was locked into being, you know, working every day on flooring and installing carpets and installing vinyl floors. So when I was talking to the provost about this, I said, it seems like we're really wasting a lot of potential here in the United States. It's too bad we can't come up with something to do some way to deal with this, address this. And the provost said, well, wait a minute, we've passed legislation and everything, that problem's been solved. Anybody that wants to go to school and get an education can do it. And I realized when they said that they really were part of the problem and didn't really know what the problem was in the education system in the United States. Per capita, we spend more money on education than just about every other developed country on the planet. They say 1 in 20 individuals in the United States right now, not 1 in 20, 1 out of 5, 20%. They say is 20% of the people in the United States right now, the citizens, are functionally illiterate. In other words, they can look at a list of ingredients and they couldn't tell you what most of the words mean. They can tell what a stop sign is a stop sign, but they are functionally illiterate. When you look at the statistics provided by some government agencies, those agencies will claim that 99.99% of our population is literate. So there's a real disconnect between some of the counters and the facts. An interesting statistic from 1920 was that approximately 5.7%, 5.8% of the people were illiterate in 1920. That's 100 years ago. That number came down until post-World War II, 1948, and in 1948 we were down to about 2.5%, 2.3%, 2.5% of the population were illiterate. In the 70s, by the 1970s, that had crept up to about 5% again, and 6%. And then now they say today 20% of the people cannot read. So when we look at these numbers, we can say, gosh, we spend so much money on education, yet we seem to be graduating people who cannot read, they cannot write. We're last in math and science. A lot of our prosperity depends upon our ability to think critically, to solve problems, to come up with new ideas, new programs, better ways to do things. Well, you can't build a better mousetrap if you can't spell the word mousetrap. You cannot appreciate history if you can't read history. So when it comes to education, I've decided to take a different approach. Much of our education would be like growing a tree, growing a garden. We plant the seeds and we water and fertilize and everything like that, in hopes to have a good crop. So we've been paying attention to the roots, taking care of the roots, but we're really not looking at the developed tree. And you can see where I'm going with this. See, education is more than a building. It's not about a building, as a matter of fact. You can have a very, very nice building, and that building can't read, they can't write, it can't do mathematics. But we spend a lot of money on buildings for education. Somewhere along the line, someone convinced people that every high school needs to have a swimming pool. So a lot of high schools have swimming pools, even though it's not needed. I mean, whether or not people can swim, it's important to be able to swim so you don't drown if you're out fishing and fall out of the boat. But it's more important to be able to read and to write coherently and to critically think, to solve problems. I've run into some people and they said, well, why would I ever need to know algebra? And I tried to explain to them that, well, if you, quite often something we learn in one area, which would seem to have no application with what we're doing right now, actually kind of leaches in. And they said, what do you mean? Well, sometimes you learn things in one area, in one skill set, and it kind of bleeds over. It transitions over into, I can apply the same kind of thinking to this problem over here. I'm laying out the floor plan of the house, or I'm laying out the walls over here, and I can apply that kind of systemic response to this problem over here, or something else I'm dealing with over here. So this is why algebra is important. This is why calculus is important. It amazes me that Euclid came up with a lot of the theorems for Euclidean geometry thousands of years ago. And yet there's people today that seem to have no clue how to do algebra. It's just beyond them. I'm thinking, wow, you're saying you're not as smart as somebody 3,000 years ago? Interesting. But they don't look at it that way. They've been told to give themselves excuses. Calculus was developed by Newton, and as a way for him to develop his Principia, his rules for physics, and Newton's laws, and the behavior of the planets, and be able to do the calculations for the behavior of the planets. That was in 1640. So calculus is now, 400 years old, yet almost a surprisingly large number of people have no clue how to do calculus. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, gee, we can't figure out something that people could do 350, 400 years ago? I mean, that's the way we need to look at this, because it's imperative that we are able to critically think and to evaluate problems analytically. Now, in the America's past, like I said, I was going to look into the past to see if we had solved some of these problems. Now, when we wanted to educate the most of the population, back when most of the population was not educated, what we came up with was the one-room schoolhouse. The one-room schoolhouse had no swimming pool, it didn't have air conditioning, it did not have a lot of things, but what it did have was a place where people of all ages would attend school and go there and get educated. And they would go through and they would teach children, everybody started out at the primer level, and they would learn how to read and write their letters, and they'd work on mathematics, and so the teacher would teach all the grades. So in one class you would have first graders all the way up to seniors in high school. And you would say, well, that'd be pretty obtuse, that'd be really hard to do. Well, no, not when you really think about it. What the teachers did was they would teach the first graders how their lessons, and then while they were then they'd work with the other groups, and then when they were not working with the seniors, and then the people and the older children that knew the material, those older children that knew the material were working with the younger children to help them with any concepts that they may have missed. And this created a community of learning that everyone enjoyed and everybody respected. And even though we're not all equally gifted with the same IQ, we were able to get people pretty well educated, to the point that in 1920, 5.7% of the people were able to read and write. If you look at the textbooks from that era, the McGuffey readers, I was looking at their first primer, and it was very impressive what they were asking people to read and to understand. And it really showed how far we've slipped as a society, in expectations for what people can read and write, and the mathematics they can accomplish and they can perform. So when we're spending money, we tend to spend a lot of money on the buildings and the children. We give the teachers money, we pay them, and the fact is, if we really look at the results, now in private industry, you either produce or you get fired. They put you in a position, you'll get laid off or whatever. If you don't do your job successfully, where you're making the company money, where you're creating new ideas, where you're troubleshooting. I'm a troubleshooter and I work in R&D, and if I didn't come up with good ideas or better ways to do things, then I wouldn't have a job in R&D. I would be relegated to something else. I have a real knack for mechanisms and hardware, and if I didn't have a knack for that and I hadn't developed these skills, then I wouldn't be able to do my job. And I wouldn't be surprised when I got fired. The teaching profession has really been, in many ways, a real failure. We spend, like I said, we spend more money than almost any other country, developed nation on the planet on our education, yet our children are very uneducated. They don't seem to have a clear understanding of history. They don't seem to have a clear understanding of mathematics. They seem to be unable to communicate effectively. And you see this in business when you get new college graduates and they can't put together a sentence. You get an email from them and you're reading this email and it's like, my gosh, this person just graduated, and how is it possible that they can't communicate effectively after going to college? So our education system is really dropping the ball, and the solution is not to spend more money on it. It's actually to just get it into smaller groups and start up the single room classroom once again. But not only have children in it up to the age of 18, but get adults in there also. If we need to find a method, and then in one of my next other videos, I will talk about my plan. But solutions that I've come up with for that narrow focus that I was talking about in my video on the methods, I'm going to apply. Where I'm looking not at trying to solve the 100% of the problem, just that 39% of the problem. See, if the adults the children were involved in their education the way they should be, then the adults would say, wait a minute, you're sitting in class playing on your phone and being disrespectful to the teacher. I see that, and I'm not going to tolerate it because it's not polite. You wouldn't do it for me and to me, and I wouldn't appreciate it, and you're doing it to the teacher, and they don't deserve it. Additionally, a lot of the adults really have no clue. They're undereducated too. The child will ask them, well, how do I solve this problem? And then the parent looks at the math problem and says, gosh, Google it. I've heard people say that. Yeah, my kid brought a word problem home to me, and they were asking me, and I told them to call their dad or to Google it. And I was shocked when I heard that. I thought to myself, gosh, what my mother did was she would contact the school and get a copy of the textbooks in question, the math book or whatever, and we get a set for the house. And then my guess is that my mother worked on the problems during the daytime while we were at school, and that way she knew where we were in school and knew what kind of problems we were dealing with. And she would have solved some of those problems, and then when we ask her a question, she'd be able to speak to that question and give us a good answer. Then again, she also made sure that we immediately studied when we came home from school. So that's one thing that studies have shown time and again, and there's a Wall Street Journal study from 20 years ago. They were saying, it's not the amount of money you spend, it's the amount of attention and priority that parents place upon education in their home. So, and the expectation they have for their children's education. And that really makes a lot of sense. If you act like you don't care about education, if you don't pay any attention to your children's education, your children are going to question, well, why do I need this education? But if you make it a priority and you focus and show them how proud you are when they're learning, and then get in there and learn also, well then, we're solving the problem. And that's my idea is that we go back to the small one-room schoolhouse. We establish places in neighborhoods where people can go to school. You don't have to get on a bus and drive an hour to go to school. We've got to get past that. We need to get the education system fixed. We don't need to try to engineer society. What we need to do is try to get people smart enough to be engineers for society. And right now, there's a shortage of millions of engineers in this country, and there's no way to address that unless we get more people involved in education. And I mean the parents. I was talking to someone about a failed school system in northern Ohio. The school system had a failure rate. It was failing all the criteria that the state had set up to be a successful school system. They had a dropout rate of over 50%, and they brought in a new superintendent, Board of Education superintendent. And the first thing he did was he started having hearings, and he had meetings, and he established he was going to go around to the high schools and talk to the parents. So he set this up, and there were no parents. Nobody showed up. Eventually he left that position because he realized that, well, if the parents aren't going to make it a priority for their children to learn, then there's no amount of education, there's no amount of teaching a teacher can do to get the ideas across. It's got to start at the home. And that's really part of the responsibility. Like I said, when I was talking about citizenship, everybody who's a citizen of the United States is a citizen, but a good citizen would be the opposite of a bad citizen. And the bad citizen is someone who tears down other individuals and hurts society, and the good citizen is the one that builds up their fellow citizens and builds up society. And so what we need to do as individuals and as parents, we need to make education a priority. Make it the priority for the children. The only thing they have to do, the sports, the vast majority of kids who play sports never play professional sports. The vast majority of people who play sing in choirs in school, in chorales, they don't become professional singers. The vast majority of people end up working jobs and they work a variety of jobs. And an education doesn't guarantee you a job, but it does show you a way to apply logic and apply a methodology that will let you successfully complete your tasks. And for private enterprise and business, that is the goal. You have a deliverable that you need to produce by such and such a date. You have a timetable, and you meet those, or you don't. If you don't, after a while, they're going to get rid of you. So our education system needs to be more focused on the adult participation. And if you're an adult and you can't read and you can't write, and you're not very well educated, it's time for you to get educated. And you'll sit in class, and you need to sit in class with your children. That way your children are saying, well, my mother is learning how to read. I'm going to learn how to read. It motivates them. Now you say, well, how can I work on a job and do this at the same time? Well, quite frankly, a lot of people who are not very well educated really don't work, or they only work part-time. So they actually have quite a bit of time to do this. And really, it's the most important thing they can do is to ensure that their children are getting educated. And that's done by making sure your children do their homework, making sure they bring their homework home, making sure they don't lie to you. Because children will lie to their parents and say, well, I don't have any homework today. Well, yeah, show me, you know. And then if they force your children to be honest with you. And that's really what we need to do with education. We need to get away from the big, go to the small, get the single room school where we can have cross training between the older kids and the younger kids, where the parents are involved and participating, and everybody's learning. Our entire society needs to read a lot more books and to grow as an individual. People ask me a lot of times, well, what is it that you enjoy about reading? Well, for example, I've read quite a bit of Charles Dickens, and if you want to read about and hear about societal woes and the play and the issues that plague society, the poor and hunger and ignorance, read Dickens. He really is really eloquent, and when you read his books, it's like, wow, I never looked at it this way. And it opens up your head, opens up your mind to new ways of thinking. When I think about all the books I've read, I'm thinking of Leo Tolstoy. He wrote a book called The Inevitable Revolution. It's a very small, short novella, maybe 25, 30 pages long. And it's one of the most profound statements for nonviolence that I'd ever read. It should be required reading. It's not, but I mean, it should be. Because, when somebody makes a profound statement that makes you say, wow, that's the best reason I've ever heard for people not to be violent. I mean, it's really something. And those people who cannot read are going to miss all that. And they're missing important aspects of their life, and they could have a more fulfilled life, period. Okay.